We met at the same cafe. This time she appeared different, still weary but with a warmth, as if something within her had found its place. She expressed remorse for her children's actions. Not only the lawsuit but the smear campaign, the social media posts, the gossip. "They're just angry," she explained. "They don't know how to handle it." "I know," I said. "Neither did I." We talked for over an hour about loss, about deceit, about being a mother, and the lack of it in my own life. In the end, we came to a consensus, a formal written and private agreement. A share of the inheritance would be placed in a trust for her grandchildren. Another portion would be donated to a charity in William's name. With the remainder, I was free to do as I wished. We left the cafe together this time. We still weren't friends, but we were no longer adversaries. When I returned home that evening, I looked at my living room walls. For the first time since the funeral, they didn't feel like they were caving in on me. I still had no husband, no children, no old friends to speak of, but I had something more valuable. A door was starting to creak open, and I was finally prepared to step through it. I told no one I was leaving. Not my lawyer, not my neighbors, not even Helena. I craved the quiet. I craved a complete severance. Too many people had formed judgments about me based on incomplete information. Too many looked at me with either pity or disdain. There was no middle ground. So I packed up my existence in silence. Deliberately and systematically, I sold the house that William and I had shared, our marital home, as the will had termed it. I couldn't remain there. Every groaning floorboard sounded like a falsehood. Every drawer I opened was a reminder of a man who managed his drawers the same way he managed his secrets. Neat, secured, and categorized. I gave most of our furniture to charity, parting with things that no longer felt like they belonged to me. I kept only the necessities. Photo albums, my mother's chinaware, some books, and clothes. I left his possessions behind, all of them, not from a place of anger, but because they were part of a different life. I purchased a small cottage a couple of towns away. It was humble, with a white picket fence and a maple tree out front. There was no history here, no gossip. I was simply another woman moving onto a quiet lane. For the first time in months, I slept soundly through the night. The mornings were filled with birdsong and the faint hiss of lawn sprinklers. I began each day with tea on my porch. I avoided the news. I ignored my phone. I just sat and breathed. The first time someone waved at me on the street, a passing jogger, I recoiled. But she just smiled. A simple smile. No judgment, no recognition. It felt like a minor miracle. I discovered the local library and volunteered my time. The director, a woman in her 60s named Ruth, greeted me warmly. She didn't pry into my past. She just gave me a carton of returned books and asked, "Think you can handle alphabetizing these?" I almost wept with relief. I began assisting in the children's section on Saturdays. The laughter, the energy, the vitality. It reminded me that parts of the world remained untouched by deceit. I adopted a dog, a mixed breed from the town shelter, medium-sized and golden with one ear that flopped over. I called her June. For the month my world had shattered and the month I decided to rebuild it. She became my shadow, sleeping at the foot of my bed, watching me with eyes free of judgment. In time, Helena got in touch. She had heard I'd moved and wanted to know if I was all right. I told her I was. Then one Saturday she came for a visit. She brought cookies, not homemade, but from a bakery in her town she thought I would enjoy. We sat on the porch with June at our feet and chatted for hours, not about William, but about books, current events, gardening, and life. Her visits became a monthly occurrence, then more regular. One day she arrived with her grandchildren. They were timid at first, hesitant, but June worked her charm, and by the afternoon's end, they were playing fetch in my yard and calling me Miss Maggie. I wasn't sure how to process it. I had never had children. I never imagined I'd earn that title, but hearing it spoken, so tentatively and kindly, stirred something in me I hadn't felt for a very long time. A feeling of belonging. I didn't attempt to be a substitute for anyone. I didn't give unsolicited advice. I was just there, present and patient. And perhaps in that quiet presence, they started to perceive me as something more than just a shadow from their family's past. I still received mail from my old town, and occasionally an article would surface online. People don't forget scandals quickly. But in my new life, I was no longer the woman who inherited a fortune through deceit. I was the woman who volunteered at the library, who rescued a shelter dog, who had a neighbor named Ruth and a porch adorned with wind chimes. And in this tranquil, gentle existence, I began to feel complete again. Not the same person I was before, that woman was gone. But someone new, someone more resilient, someone who had endured the flames and emerged with grace. It was on a Saturday that it happened. A bright, clear morning, the kind where everything feels calm, where the air itself seems to offer forgiveness. I had just gotten back from the farmer's market, with June trotting at my side, when I saw the envelope on my porch. No sender, no handwriting, just like the previous one. I froze. The last time this occurred, it had ended with me heaving over my sink, trembling with fear and humiliation. But I was not that woman anymore. I refused to let a sealed envelope rob me of my peace. Still, my hand shook slightly as I tore it open. Inside were photocopies of documents, legal motions, comments from an internet forum, and at the very top, a single sentence scrawled in bold red ink. "You thought this was over?" I didn't need to see a signature to know who had sent it. Helena's son. I had heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had rejected the settlement. He claimed his mother had dishonored their father's memory by making peace with me, that she had sold him out for a trust fund and a few apologies. It seemed he had become fixated, certain that William had been manipulated. He was digging through old emails, contacting William's former business associates, and gathering anything he could find to have the case reopened. That envelope was his declaration of war. He was not finished with me. I called my attorney right away. He advised me to remain calm. Nothing in the documents was new or provided legal grounds. But still, just hearing those words again, manipulation, fraud, undue influence, it dragged something old and painful back into the light. By Monday, the local paper had caught wind of the renewed accusations. Just a small mention. Just enough. I stayed inside for a week. The anxiety came back, its fingers tightening around my throat just as they had in the days after the funeral. June was a constant presence at my side. At night, I would sit up in bed, my laptop shut, trying to stop my hands from trembling. Then Helena called. "I heard what he's doing," she said. "I am so sorry." I was silent. "He's angry," she went on. "But he isn't well, Maggie. He's not thinking straight. He's trying to ruin me," I said. "No," she replied firmly. "He's trying to find someone to punish because he doesn't know what else to do with his grief. And I will not allow him to use me or the ghost of William to do it." 2 days later, she was at my door. She had contacted the Attorney General's office and submitted a sworn statement in my defense. She had officially gone on record. I had not coerced William. He had been of sound mind and had made his decisions based on his own guilt, not because of manipulation. She stood with me in public, and when the hearing was held to determine if the case could even be revisited, she sat next to me in the courtroom. Our attorneys presented their cases. The judge examined the evidence, and in less than half an hour it was done. Case dismissed. No basis, no new evidence, no reopening. Outside the courthouse, we stood side by side as reporters yelled questions. I said nothing. Helena spoke. "She is not the villain here," she stated. "She is another victim of the same man who misled us all. My son requires help, not more conflict. And Margaret has earned her peace." I wept in the car on the way home, not from relief, but because someone had finally believed me, publicly and without reservation. Later that week, I met Helena at the park. We sat beneath a large oak tree, watching her granddaughter on the swings. She offered me a sandwich and said, "You know, I once thought of you as the woman who took my husband." I didn't reply. She smiled gently. But now I realize we were both just trying to weather the same hurricane from different houses. We sat in silence for a time, just breathing. I understood something in that moment. This wasn't the end of the hurt, but it was the end of the pursuit, the end of having to justify who I was to people who had already made up their minds. Let them gossip. Let them conjecture. I had the truth and I had my peace. And for the first time since William's funeral, I had someone standing with me when I needed it most. The house I purchased was quiet in a way that didn't feel desolate. It felt deserved. The gentle whisper of the wind in the trees, June's occasional bark from the yard, the creak of old wood settling under my feet. After all that had happened, I had come to treasure the stillness. I began to construct something new. Nothing grand or newsworthy. Just a life. A real quiet, simple life. I became part of a community garden, enrolled in weekly cooking classes at the local senior center. I volunteered at the library on Mondays and Fridays, reading to children whose parents were too overwhelmed or exhausted. Nobody there asked about my history. Nobody knew me as that woman. Here I was simply Margaret or Miss Maggie to some, and I preferred it that way. I still received the odd letter, subtly accusatory messages from old acquaintances, former neighbors, and sometimes even journalists looking to rehash the story. I threw them all away. They had no place in the life I was building. One weekend, Helena came to visit. She brought a pie and a photo album. We went through pictures of William, not the versions I knew but the ones she did. Birthday celebrations, school productions, a man in a silly Halloween costume with his children. I braced myself for pain, but mostly I just felt a sense of detachment. She asked if I wanted to keep any of the photos. I chose one, only one. A candid shot of William laughing, a baby girl perched on his shoulders. His daughter. The same daughter who had once labeled me a thief. I had it framed and hung it in the back hallway, not as a memorial to him, but as a reminder of the truth, of the profound cost of deceit, and of what it had taken from everyone involved. Helena's relationships with her children were still complicated. Her son had relocated. Her daughter maintained a cautious distance, but gradually there were small signs of progress. A phone call, a shared meal. I never inquired. It was not my business. But I could see the determination in Helena's eyes, the mother attempting to construct a bridge from the rubble. And then one day she brought them with her. It was autumn. The air was crisp and leaves swirled like golden dust. I had set a table in the garden. A simple lunch. Roasted vegetables, baked chicken, and fresh-baked bread. Helena showed up with her daughter and 2 young children. The same granddaughter I knew from the park, and a younger boy, clinging to his mother's hand. I was anxious. So was she. But children are remarkable. They don't carry the same weight as adults. The little girl immediately ran to June. The boy followed her lead. Helena's daughter stood awkwardly at first. Then, after a moment of tense silence, she met my gaze and said, "They call you Miss Maggie at the library." I nodded. "They like you," she added, her tone carefully neutral. "They're wonderful kids," I replied. We didn't discuss William or inheritances or legal battles. We talked about school lunches, the weather, dogs, books, and recipes. Nothing of substance, but it was enough. After they departed, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. I looked around at the home I had made for myself, the shelves lined with donated books, the garden I had started to cultivate, the rug that June had declared her own, the echo of laughter that had briefly filled the air that afternoon. It didn't nullify the past. It didn't undo the betrayal. But it offered me something else. A new start. And for the first time I allowed myself to think, maybe I'm not just getting by anymore. Maybe, just maybe, I'm beginning to live. The invitation arrived on a simple card, white with a gold border. Helena's handwriting was neat and measured. Christmas Eve. Dinner. Bring June. No obligation, but we would love for you to come. I looked at it for hours, caught between tears and a smile. A year prior, I was the woman who had stolen her husband's fortune. Now, I was being invited to her family's Christmas table. It didn't feel like a win. It felt delicate. Nevertheless, I went. The drive was peaceful. Snow blanketed the roads in soft drifts, muffling the world in winter's calm. June sat in the back, her tail thumping periodically, her presence a source of comfort. When I pulled up, Helena greeted me at the door wearing a red sweater, her silver hair styled back. She hugged me, not formally, not out of obligation. It was a genuine embrace, one that conveyed, "I see you and I no longer hold any resentment." The living room was cozy, filled with gentle music and the scent of pine. Her grandchildren were already chasing each other in circles. Her daughter offered a small nod from the other side of the room. Not a smile, but not a scowl either. And that was progress. Dinner was uncomplicated. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, assorted vegetables, and 2 types of pie. We ate and talked, passing dishes as if we had done it countless times before. Yet, for me, every single moment felt extraordinary. Midway through the meal, the little boy, her grandson, turned to me and inquired, "Are you the real Miss Maggie from the library?" I chuckled. "That's me." He nodded, seemingly content, and then said, "My mom says you tell the best stories." I glanced over at his mother. Our eyes met, and this time she smiled. Later, after the plates were cleared and the children were constructing a Lego fortress by the Christmas tree, Helena joined me on the sofa with a glass of wine. "You know," she began, "last year I never thought this night would be possible. I thought I would never be able to look at you without feeling rage." I nodded silently. "But now," she went on, "when I see you, I don't see betrayal. I see resilience. I see grace." My throat constricted. I looked at the tree, its lights, the stockings hung by the fireplace. This home, this family, so different from my own, so far removed from the life I thought I would have. And yet there I was. "I never meant to replace you," I whispered. "I never even knew there was anyone to replace." "I know," she said. "I know that now." We didn't speak much after that. We didn't have to. Just before I left, her granddaughter presented me with a handmade card. It had stick figure drawings in marker, one with a gray ponytail, the other a dog with a floppy ear. It read, "To Tia Maggie, Merry Christmas. Tia, Aunt." I stood at the doorway, card in my hand, and my heart cracked open. Not from sorrow, but from the most tender form of healing. I had been branded an outsider, a danger, a thief. But here in this moment, in this warm, flawed, complex room, I had found a place. A new family. A new identity, one not founded on another's deceptions, but on my own truth, my own decisions, and the quiet strength of having endured. As I drove away that night, with snow starting to fall once more, I had a realization. I had lost everything I once believed was important, and in its place I had found something far more real. Spring emerged gradually, gently unthawing the cold from the ground. The maple tree in my front yard sprouted new green leaves like tiny assurances, and the sound of birdsong once again filled the mornings. There was a tranquility in the air, a silent acknowledgement that some things must end for others to start. I walked June every morning along the neighborhood paths, greeting familiar faces, discussing new books with the librarian, and assisting children in selecting stories on rainy days. Here no one whispers about my past. No one brings up William. They know me simply as Miss Maggie, the lady who reads stories with too many different voices, who always has dog biscuits in her pockets, and who smiles even when her eyes still hold a hint of shadow. And that's all I need. But it isn't always effortless. The past sometimes resurfaces in small ways. A fleeting memory, a photograph found inside an old book, an article someone forwards without consideration. Occasionally at night, I'll wake up and reach for a space in my bed that is no longer occupied. But the pain is different now. It's not a sharp wound. It's a dull, manageable ache. I've learned to coexist with it. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch with Helena. We don't talk as much as we used to when we meet. We no longer need to. The quiet between us has transformed from uncomfortable to comforting. We drank our tea, watched June frolic on the lawn, and listened to the sound of her grandchildren playing in the yard. Her daughter has started visiting more frequently. Her son, though still distant, sent a brief but sincere letter of apology. Healing is rarely a straight line, but it was happening. "I still think about him sometimes," Helena said, her gaze on the sky. "Not the lies, just the good moments. The man he allowed us to know." I nodded. "Me too. We didn't try to pretend the good negated the bad. We didn't offer forgiveness he hadn't sought. But we recognized the fragments he left behind and the resilience required to rise from the wreckage. I'm glad we didn't let him take everything from us," I said softly. Helena turned to me. "He didn't. We still had ourselves. And now we have this. This. An improbable friendship born from betrayal but forged by choice." When she departed that evening, I remained on the porch long after the sun had set. June rested her head on my lap. The breeze carried the fragrance of blooming lilacs, the same kind my mother once grew. And I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, the woman who stood at a funeral and discovered her entire life was a fabrication. The woman who was shamed, attacked, and isolated. The woman who inherited not just a fortune, but a burden. I had laid that woman to rest, not with bitterness but with respect, because she had survived. And in her stead, I had become someone stronger. Someone who no longer needed to shout to be understood. Someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone. Someone who took a shattered life and pieced it back together, one quiet, deliberate brick at a time. I hadn't merely found peace. I had seized it on my own terms, not through vengeance but by outliving the turmoil, by enduring the gossip, by choosing to stand in my truth when every lie had tried to make me fall. I stood up, stretched, and watched the final rays of light fade behind the trees. Tomorrow would arrive as it always does, and I would be ready for it. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and please feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your experience is important. I made a chicken casserole, the economical kind that feeds a family and provides leftovers. I set the table as always, called everyone to come down, and attempted to pretend that this was a normal family dinner, that I was a part of it. Tiffany sat across from me, her thumb scrolling endlessly through her phone between bites. Brian chewed his food in silence, his eyes locked on the screen of his laptop, which was propped up beside his plate. The children bickered, poked at their food, and were excused from the table before they had finished. In an effort to generate some conversation, I remarked gently, "You know, if we all sat together for meals more often, maybe the boys would eat better." Tiffany did not look up. Brian cleared his throat. "We're just a little overwhelmed right now, Mom." It was then that Tiffany lifted her head. Her voice was flat, yet it was laced with a sharp undercurrent. "You're always making these little comments, Maggie, as if we don't know how to run our own household." I blinked. "I didn't mean it like that at all. I just..." She cut me off, setting her fork down with a loud, definitive clink. "You do a lot of talking for someone who doesn't actually contribute enough to be making suggestions." The words landed with the force of a slap. The air seemed to evacuate the room. Brian said nothing. He simply lowered his gaze to his plate. I stared at them both, frozen in place. My hands began to tremble beneath the table. I opened my mouth to form a response, but no words came out, because in that singular moment, I was forced to confront a reality I had been denying for weeks. I was not a member of this family. I was a liability masquerading as a helper, a placeholder until they could catch their breath again. Someone to be utilized, not someone to be honored. I got up from the table without finishing my meal, carried my plate to the sink, and rinsed it in silence. My heart thudded violently in my chest as I walked down the hallway to the makeshift room they had designated for me. I sat on the edge of the air mattress and stared at the floor for a very long time. That night, sleep eluded me. I thought of all the years I had guided Brian through his emotional tempests, of the nights I had gone to bed hungry so that he could eat, of the countless sacrifices I had made without ever being asked. And now I was not contributing enough. After paying half their mortgage, cooking their meals, cleaning their house, and loving their children, I still wasn't enough. By the time morning arrived, something inside of me had fundamentally shifted. The silence at the breakfast table was thick and suffocating. Tiffany actively avoided my eyes. Brian behaved as if nothing had transpired. I did not speak. I couldn't, not without crying, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. So I returned to the guest room, zipped up my suitcase, and began folding the few articles of clothing I had brought with me from my real home. The home I should have never left. Then I saw it, just outside the bedroom door, propped against the hallway wall. My suitcase, already packed, already waiting. As if they knew. As if this outcome had been decided for me the very moment Tiffany spoke those cutting words. A part of me cracked wide open, but another deeper part of me hardened into steel. I was done. They didn't realize it yet, but they were about to lose far more than just their housekeeper, their unpaid nanny, their emergency fund. They were about to lose the one person who would have done anything to protect them, and I was going to ensure they felt the full weight of that loss. I did not say goodbye. I wanted to, at least to the boys, but I couldn't bring myself to wake them. They were innocent pawns in all of this. They hadn't chosen to treat me as if I were disposable. But I knew that if I saw their sleepy eyes and felt their small hands reaching for one last hug, I would be unable to leave. So I refrained. I left a note on the kitchen counter, just a single line written in the neat cursive I had learned in Catholic school. "Thank you for having me." I carried my suitcase out the front door just as the sun was beginning to rise. No one noticed. No one stopped me. Brian did not come down the stairs. Tiffany did not peek out from the bedroom. The profound silence of that house served as confirmation of everything I already knew. As I drove away, the road ahead blurred through tears I fought to hold back. Not because I regretted leaving, but because I regretted ever allowing myself to believe I belonged there. I pulled into my own driveway just past 8 a.m. The house stood like a forgotten promise. A little sagging, a little dusty, but still mine, still waiting for me. I opened the front door and was met with the comforting smell of stale air and the passage of time, a kind of silence that echoed with familiarity. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture as if it might disappear beneath my fingertips. My wedding photograph with Harold was still on the fireplace mantel. Our bed was still made. The last set of sheets he had slept on still neatly folded. My slippers were exactly where I had left them. And in that moment I felt profoundly foolish for ever leaving it, for ever thinking I could find true comfort anywhere else. Before I began to unpack, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my banking app. I scrolled to the automatic transfers, the ones I had established to cover a portion of Brian and Tiffany's mortgage. I stared at them, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I pressed cancel on each one. Click, click, click. And then I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence settle around me like a warm blanket. That afternoon, I received a text from Brian. Hey, just wanted to check if you made it home okay. I did not reply. 2 hours later, another message arrived. I know things got weird, but maybe we could talk soon. Still, I said nothing. By nightfall, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of Tiffany's cruel words. Just the transparent concern of a man realizing his safety net had just walked out the door. I heated up a frozen meal and sat at my own table for the first time in months. I didn't eat much, but I swallowed every bite with a kind of dignity I hadn't tasted in years. They thought they could dismiss me as if I were an old couch, too worn to be of any use. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed I would remain quiet. They had no idea what losing me would truly cost them. And I was only just beginning to comprehend the value they had so carelessly overlooked. The next time I heard from them, it would not be a casual check-in. It would be a desperate cry for help. The first week back in my own home felt like waking from a long, agonizing dream. I cleaned every room from top to bottom, not because it was necessary, but because I needed it. I needed to reclaim my space, to remind myself that I existed independently of their expectations, that I had a life before I became their solution. But even with the windows thrown open and the sun warming the hardwood floors, the silence was oppressive. I missed the boys, their peals of laughter, their tiny hands tugging at my sleeve. I missed their chaotic questions and their unexpected, heartfelt hugs. I did not miss Tiffany's hostile glares or Brian's passivity, but the absence of the children, that was a genuine ache. A few days later, I bought them a gift. I know what you're thinking. Their parents didn't deserve it. And maybe they didn't, but the boys did. They had no comprehension of what their parents had done. No idea of the words that had been spoken behind closed doors, or what it felt like to be discarded by your own son. So I ordered 2 new iPads, preloaded them with educational games and drawing applications, and added a soft leather case for each one, navy blue for Jake, forest green for Liam. I wrapped them with care, wrote a handwritten note, and paid extra for overnight delivery. The note said, "Even when I'm far away, I'm always right here. Love, Grandma." No response came from Brian. No text message, no word of thanks. Nothing from Tiffany, naturally, but I knew they had received the packages. I had the tracking confirmation. A week later, I saw the boys on Tiffany's Instagram story. They were playing on the iPads, grinning from ear to ear. Tiffany hadn't tagged me, hadn't mentioned my name, but I saw their smiles. For the moment, that was enough. Then the silence returned. I occupied myself with jigsaw puzzles and books and long walks around the block. I did not cry, not out loud, but every time I passed the hallway where Harold's coat still hung, I felt a familiar tightening in my throat. And then one night, completely out of the blue, I woke up with a strange sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something compelled me to check my finances. I hadn't given them much thought since canceling the transfers, but I logged into my bank account anyway, and found nothing immediately out of the ordinary. What did catch my eye, however, was an email alert from 2 months prior. One I hadn't opened in the chaos of my move. It was from my bank. A notification of a large withdrawal Brian had made. Money that had not been allocated to the mortgage. My heart began to race. I dug deeper. I pulled up old statements. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, but I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The numbers simply didn't add up. There were repeated charges for a company I didn't recognize, something with a vague, generic name. I Googled it. It was a gambling website. I stared at the screen, stunned. Over a dozen charges spread out over several weeks. Hundreds of dollars each time, sometimes just days apart. All while I was living under their roof. All while he was telling me how tight things were. While he allowed his wife to belittle me. While I was paying his bills. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He didn't just use me. He had lied to me, not just by omission, but with the full and conscious knowledge that he was funneling my money into a dark hole he couldn't crawl out of. And what was worse, he didn't even have the courage to ask for help. He hid it. He buried it beneath a facade of fake politeness and long drawn-out silences. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, the blue glow of the computer screen casting long shadows on the walls. I thought of every single time I had believed I was helping him, supporting him, saving him, and I realized with sickening clarity that he was letting me drown myself just to keep his own head above water. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt something I had never before felt toward my own child: resentment. Not the sharp, fleeting kind, but the slow, acidic kind that eats away at your ribs. The kind that comes from the knowledge that your love was used as a weapon against you. And I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same between us again. The next morning, I awoke a changed woman. I didn't feel like my old self, not the version of me that used to make excuses, to soften blows, to look the other way. I felt sharper, colder, as if something deep inside had finally snapped back into alignment after years of being dislocated. I didn't text Brian. I didn't confront him. What would have been the point? He would have just denied it, minimized it, blamed it on stress or Tiffany or life itself. I knew that dance all too well. I had watched Harold perform it with his own secrets more times than I cared to count. But this wasn't about Harold. This was about me. I opened a new savings account that day, one that Brian could not touch. I transferred every penny I had left. I closed the old one. I canceled the credit card I had once handed to him, just in case. I deleted every automatic payment that had his name attached to it. Then I had the locks on my front door changed. It was a dramatic gesture, I knew that, but it felt necessary. It felt like a ritual, sealing the space between the woman I used to be and the woman I was in the process of becoming. The calls started a week later. At first it was just Brian with his casual check-ins. Just wanted to say hi. The boys miss you. But I could hear the edge in his voice, the underlying tension. He wasn't just calling to chat. Then the pointed questions began. Hey, did the bank call you? Something weird happened with my account. I think there might have been a mistake with the mortgage. Did you maybe forget to? I didn't answer. I let every single call go straight to voicemail. The text messages started stacking up like a pile of unpaid bills. Asterisk, Tiffany says you changed your number. Are you okay? You've been acting so strange. Can we please just talk? Please, asterisk. No, we could not. I watched from a safe distance as the cracks in their picture-perfect little house began to deepen. Tiffany started posting fewer photos. When she did, her smile looked tired and forced. The kids' clothes looked older, the backgrounds of the pictures more cluttered. The entire tone had shifted. I could tell the money was beginning to dry up. Then came the definitive sign. The one that struck me with a sense of vindication I didn't even know I had been seeking. A letter from the bank addressed to me, either by mistake or perhaps intentionally, since I had once co-signed something I barely understood. It was a pre-foreclosure notice. I stared at the word delinquent, as if it were written in fire. That very same night, Brian called again. I didn't answer. He texted instead. Asterisk, I know you're upset, but Mom, we need help. Just this once, please. Asterisk, no apology. No acknowledgement of the gambling, the lies, the betrayal. Just pure, unadulterated desperation. And I will admit it, a part of me ached to fix it, to make everything right again, to be the mother who swoops in and saves the day, who earns back her worth through endless sacrifice. But that part of me was dying, starved by years of one-sided giving. Instead, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Brian, not to Tiffany, but to myself. I listed everything I had given them. Every bill I had paid, every favor, every ride, every meal, every single sacrifice. Then beneath that long list I wrote, "And still it wasn't enough." That sentence stared back at me like a final verdict. It was the truth, and at long last I was done trying to rewrite it. They were about to learn what life looked like without my support. And I was about to learn what life looked like when I finally chose myself first. I disappeared. Not physically, of course. I was still in my home, still walking the same familiar streets, still buying my groceries at the same corner store. But emotionally, digitally, and spiritually, I vanished. I shut down my Facebook account, blocked Brian's number, changed my email address, and turned off all notifications for everything. I needed silence. Not the heavy, painful kind I had lived with since Harold's passing, but a new kind of silence. A clean silence. The kind that makes space for something better to grow. I started small. I began taking a walk every morning, just 20 minutes through my neighborhood, past the same mailboxes and barking dogs and neatly trimmed hedges I had seen 1,000 times before. But now I saw them with different eyes. The air felt colder, crisper, as if it held more truth, as if it could cut straight through denial. Then I signed up for therapy. Not because I believed I was broken, though perhaps I was, but because I needed someone to talk to who wouldn't try to manipulate me or guilt me or demand anything from me. I cried my way through the first 3 sessions. I hadn't cried in front of another human being in years. I told her everything. About Harold's quiet selfishness, about Brian's growing distance, about Tiffany's palpable disdain, about the time I overheard Tiffany mocking my clothes to a friend on speakerphone, about the meals they never thanked me for, about the way Brian used to call me Mama when he needed something and Ma when he didn't want to talk, about how I had paid for his childhood, his college education, his first car, his wedding suit, and now his mortgage, all while unknowingly fueling his addiction and being told I wasn't enough. My therapist didn't say much, but she looked at me. Really looked at me, and somehow that was everything. Next, I pulled my old sewing machine out of the attic. I hadn't touched it since before Harold got sick, back in the days when I used to make costumes for school plays, Halloween outfits for Brian, and pillows for the church bazaar. I dusted it off, oiled the joints, and started stitching again. At first, it was just simple mending, old towels, worn-out shirts. But soon I was creating tote bags, aprons, and custom baby blankets. I set up a small online store. Nothing big, nothing flashy, but it was all mine. And people bought them. Strangers sent me thank you messages, asked for more, paid full price, and told me that my stitching reminded them of their own grandmothers. For the first time in years, I was being valued. Not as a mother, not as a helper, not as a wallet, but as myself. One afternoon, I opened a new journal. The pages were crisp and untouched. I wrote across the first line in thick black ink. *I am not a burden. I am not invisible. I am not disposable. And beneath that, I am a woman who deserves peace. It became my mantra. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't need to, because slowly but surely, I was becoming someone I hadn't been in a very long time. Not just someone who survived, but someone who was beginning to thrive. And meanwhile, the world I had left behind was starting to crack at the seams. I didn't hear from Brian for over 3 weeks. Not a single word, no texts, no calls, no last-ditch apologies. The silence was strange at first, almost eerie, but it wasn't painful. It was just quiet, like the ringing in your ears that subsides after a fire alarm finally stops. You don't realize how loud the noise was until it's finally gone. But then, slowly, signs of their unraveling began to surface. They were subtle, like smoke seeping from under a closed door. Tiffany's Instagram profile changed. She used to post meticulously curated photos of the boys in matching outfits, pictures of latte art, and updates on her new home decor. All presented with bright filters and toothy smiles. Suddenly there were fewer pictures. The captions grew shorter. The smiles vanished. And then there was nothing at all. I would check once a week just to see. Call it curiosity, call it a flicker of concern. I told myself it wasn't spite. I just needed to know how far the echo of my absence had carried. One afternoon, while scrolling through the local neighborhood app, I saw a listing. Gently used sectional sofa. Must pick up. Urgent. It was their couch. I recognized the throw pillows. A week later, another post. Brand name handbags for sale. DM for details. Then came the car. Tiffany's SUV, the one she refused to let anyone else drive, was gone from the driveway in the background of a photo someone else had posted. In its place sat a dented old sedan. Their public image was fading. The polish had been stripped away. The next time I went into town, I saw Brian at the grocery store alone. He didn't see me. Or perhaps he pretended not to. He was wearing the same hoodie I had sewn a patch onto 3 winters ago. His cart contained generic cereal, frozen pizza, and baby wipes. No steaks, no wine, no organic anything. He looked tired, pale, and hollow. I watched him from behind a display of canned soup. And for one fragile second, something inside of me wanted to walk up to him, to say hello, to ask how the boys were doing, to offer to help. But then I remembered the sound of Tiffany's voice, crisp and cutting. You don't contribute enough to be making suggestions. So I let him pass. That night I cooked myself a real meal, not something frozen or microwaved. I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and set the table with the good plates just for me. The house felt warm, safe, and peaceful. And then on Christmas Eve there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the window. There was no car in the driveway. A delivery box sat on my porch, large and wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside were 2 smaller packages. One was addressed to Grandma, the other to Mimi. The nickname Liam had started calling me when he was still learning to speak. My breath caught in my throat. Inside were the same iPads I had sent them weeks ago, carefully wrapped again, but now they had been decorated with stickers and glitter. One of them had a note attached, written in big, childish handwriting. *, we miss you. Merry Christmas. Come back soon. *. I sat on the floor and I wept. Not for Brian. Not for Tiffany. But for the children, for the situation they were caught in, for what they couldn't possibly understand. I wanted to run to them, to hold them, to tell them that none of this was their fault. But instead I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out 2 new jackets I had bought on clearance and never mailed, and began to pack another box. I filled it with love disguised as essentials. Gloves, books, warm socks, small toys, and another note. *, a grandma's love doesn't need permission. It's always yours. *, I dropped it at the post office the next morning. No return address, no expectation. Just love with boundaries. Because they had to learn. I wouldn't disappear from their lives, but I also would no longer be their foundation. They would have to learn to rebuild it themselves. Christmas came and went in a manner I hadn't experienced in years. It was quiet, still, and entirely mine. I decorated the tree by myself, hung Harold's favorite ornament near the top, and lit a single candle by his photograph on the mantel. I didn't cook a large feast, just baked my mother's cinnamon bread, the kind she used to make on snowy mornings, and let the warm, sweet scent fill the house. There was no shouting, no chaos, no frantic scrambling to impress guests who didn't care. There was only peace. But even peace has its shadows. I missed the boys. I missed the sound of their laughter bouncing off the walls, the way Jake would curl up next to me on the couch like a cat, the way Liam would try to pronounce words that were too big for his mouth. I wondered what kind of Christmas they were having. The answer arrived a few days later, wrapped in Instagram silence and a single text message from Brian. "Hope you had a good holiday, Mom." Not, "We missed you." Not, "The boys asked about you." Just that one cold, detached sentence. But I already knew what kind of holiday they had had. You could see it in the absences. No Christmas photos, no matching pajamas, no decorated tree. And then I saw it. A local classified post on the day after Christmas. Urgent. Looking for part-time babysitting. Flexible hours. Must be reliable. Background check required. The poster was Tiffany. My heart both squeezed and swelled at the same time. They needed help. Not a handout, not anymore. They needed support, structure, and stability, things I had once provided like clockwork, as naturally as breathing without ever being thanked for it. I could have called. I could have reached out. But I didn't. Instead, I did something else. I sent another package to the boys. This one was carefully thought out. Inside were warm winter coats, handmade scarves, new books, and small wooden toys. But there was also something extra. 2 framed photographs, one of me with Jake, And another with Liam, taken the last time we had made cookies together. The smiles in those photos were real. The joy was whole. And then one final envelope, addressed to both Brian and Tiffany. Inside was a card. On the front was a watercolor painting of a tree losing its leaves. On the inside I had handwritten in pen. Asterisk, love isn't alone. Respect isn't optional. And help isn't forever. Asterisk, no signature, no threats. Just the truth. Days passed, then a week. Then one afternoon my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a box on my porch. There was no return label. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and scotch tape, were the 2 photo frames returned. But the coats and the books were gone. And on the back of the card I had sent, a new line had been added in Brian's handwriting. Asterisk, we understand. We'll figure it out. Asterisk. I stood there for a long time holding the card, my heart thudding in my chest. He was starting to get it. Not completely. Not yet. But the cracks were turning into reflections. The next step would be painful, for him, for her, for the boys. But I would not interfere. Sometimes love means stepping back far enough to let them fall, so they can finally learn how to stand on their own. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was folding laundry, the kind of humdrum chore that fills the silence without drawing attention to itself. My phone buzzed on the counter across the room. I almost didn't answer it, but some instinct told me I should. It was Brian. His voice sounded as if he hadn't slept in days. Mom, he said. Please, I need to see you. There was no bitterness in his tone, no attempt at guilt-tripping, just a quality I hadn't heard in years, honesty. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. I simply told him I would be home the next day if he wanted to stop by. At 2 p.m., I heard the sound of tires on my gravel driveway. I peeked out the window and saw his car. Not the old SUV, but a compact sedan that looked either borrowed or bought cheap. He walked up the steps slowly, as if his body were heavier than it used to be. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He had lost a significant amount of weight. His eyes were sunken and his cheeks were pale. The confident, lazy slouch he always wore, the one he had picked up sometime after marrying Tiffany, was gone. In its place was something raw and stripped bare. Can I come in? He asked. I hesitated for just a second, then stepped aside. He sat on the very edge of the couch as if he thought it might reject him, his hands clasped in his lap, wringing each other. I messed up, he said immediately. You don't need to say it. I already know. I remained silent. He looked around my house as if he were seeing it for the very first time. The worn armchair, the stack of books on the coffee table, the single candle still burning on the mantel. I didn't realize how peaceful it was here, he said quietly. Still I did not speak. And then he broke. I'm in trouble, Mom, he whispered. I think I'm addicted to online betting. I tried to stop. I swear I did. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd just pick up the phone. And Tiffany, she doesn't understand. She just wants the money back. That's all she ever talks about. He paused, choking on his words. I've ruined everything. The house is behind on payments. The kids ask why there's no heat on some nights. Tiffany's talking about moving back in with her mother's. I don't know what to do. And then came the question I had been dreading, the one I knew was inevitably coming. Can you help us? Just this once. We just need a little push. I swear I'll pay you back. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This was my child. My baby. The boy I had once rocked through fevers and nighttime fears. Now drowning in a sea of choices I could not make for him. And yet I stood up slowly, walked to the front door, opened it and said softly but firmly, No. He froze, blinking in disbelief. I'm not saying never, I clarified. But not today. Not until you truly understand what it cost me to sit in this room alone, while you allowed someone else to humiliate me in yours. He tried to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. I loved you through every stage of your life. I sacrificed without ever being asked. I gave until I had nothing left, until I disappeared. And you watched it happen. You let it happen. So now you will have to live in the silence that you created. A single tear slipped down his cheek. I'm sorry, he whispered. And for the first time in a very long time I believed him. But it was not enough. He left 10 minutes later. He didn't slam the door. He didn't stomp away. He just walked to his car like a man who was just learning how to carry the weight of his own mistakes. That night I cried. But not for him. I cried for the mother I used to be. The one who thought that love meant endless forgiveness. That woman was gone. And in her place stood someone new. Someone who was ready to set the terms. 3 weeks passed. No calls, no texts. Just silence. But this time it didn't feel like a punishment. Felt like space. A quiet interlude between storms. A space for him to sit with himself, and for me to decide what I truly needed. Then one morning, just as I was about to head to the post office, there was a knock on the door. I opened it and there he was. Brian. His hair was longer, his beard unkempt, but his eyes. They were different. Not desperate, not manipulative. Just tired and honest. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He sat on the couch again, but not like a stranger this time. This time he sat like a man who was asking for the floor beneath him to hold steady. "I've started going to meetings," he said. "Gamblers Anonymous. Every Tuesday and Saturday." I said nothing. I just listened. I sold the SUV. I canceled the credit cards. I got a job doing deliveries at night. It's not much, but it's something. I'm trying, Mom. I really am. I waited. I knew there was more to come. "I'm scared," he admitted. "We're 2 months behind on the mortgage. Tiffany. She's angry all the time. The boys hear everything. I don't want to lose them." He looked up at me, his gaze raw. "I need help. But this time I'm not just asking for money. I need structure. I need you to teach me how to be responsible, how to stop depending on everyone else." I swallowed hard. This was the moment. This was the crossroads. I stood, went into the kitchen, and returned with a folder. Inside was a payment agreement, a detailed budget plan, a printed list of rehab clinics, and a separation checklist. He opened it slowly. His eyes widened. "What is this?" "My terms," I said. "I will pay the past due amount on the mortgage, just enough to keep the house from being taken. One time. That is it. From this point forward, you are in control of your own money. I will help guide you if you show up. But if you miss a single therapy session, a single group meeting, if I catch one single charge on your account from a betting site, I won't," he cut in. I didn't flinch. "If you want this help," I continued, my voice steady, "you will also separate your finances from Tiffany's completely. No joint accounts, no shared cards. You handle your side. She handles hers." He hesitated. "That's not going to go over well," he muttered. "That is your decision to make," I said. "But if you choose to stay tangled in her chaos, I am out." His eyes darted back to the folder, to the agreement, to the checklist. His hands trembled. And then he nodded. "Okay." And just like that, I saw something shift. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but the dawn of accountability. We shook hands. He signed the papers. We set up weekly check-ins. My rules, my timing. And then he stood to leave. At the door he turned back to me. "I never realized how much I leaned on you until you stepped away." I smiled faintly. "That's the thing about leaning," I said. "It works, until the person holding you up finally decides to stand aside." He left in silence. I locked the door behind him, and for the first time in years, I felt as if I had won something. Not by saving someone else, but by finally saving myself. There was one chapter left, and they still had one final lesson to learn. The weeks that followed were quieter than I had anticipated. Not peaceful, not yet, but quieter. The air was still thick with tension, but it was accompanied by a sense of anticipation. The kind you feel just before a storm finally breaks. You can sense the pressure, the weight of something significant about to change. Brian, for the most part, kept his word. He attended his meetings. He adhered to his budget plan. Slowly, and with painstaking effort, he began to untangle himself from the mess he had created. But it wasn't a perfect process. Nothing ever is. I could see the immense strain in his eyes, the way his hands still trembled when he checked his bank account. He wanted to earn back trust, but trust was a currency he had overspent, and it was not returning easily. Tiffany, on the other hand, was not the same woman. She continued to post her curated, perfect pictures on social media, but the cracks in the facade were visible. I could see it in her eyes when she came to drop off the boys for a visit. The tension between them was palpable. Every little thing seemed to set her off. The way he folded the laundry incorrectly, the way he left his shoes in the hallway. She would snap at him, then immediately retreat into her phone, as if she could block out the world around her. But the most telling moment came when Brian finally informed her of his decision to separate their finances. He didn't do it in a dramatic fashion like you see in the movies. There was no shouting, no explosive fight. Just a quiet, weary conversation at the kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore, Tiff," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "I can't keep depending on you to solve everything. I have to do this myself. For me. For the kids." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, she spoke in a tone I had never heard her use before. It wasn't harsh or cruel. It was small. "You're right," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you to fix it all. I thought we could just keep going on like this, but I don't know if I can do it anymore either." They didn't get a divorce right then and there. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not with resentment but with a sense of acceptance. He had done what I had asked of him. He had made the choice to stand on his own 2 feet, and it was incredibly difficult, but it was happening slowly. And I didn't offer my help. I didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. I didn't step in. I let them figure it out for themselves. A week later, I received a call from Brian. It was late in the evening. I had just finished a project for my little side business and was cleaning up the kitchen when my phone rang. It wasn't the kind of text I had come to expect. It wasn't a desperate request for help. It was just him. "Mom, I've been thinking. I want to move out." I paused, setting the dish down in the sink. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "It's time. I can't keep living under this roof like I'm just a guest. I need my own place. I need to be able to take care of my kids the right way. It's going to be hard, but I can do it. I want to do it." I took a deep breath. "You're right," I said, my own voice tight but calm. "You can do it. I know you can." I didn't tell him what I was truly thinking. That this was the moment. This was the first real step toward the future I had been waiting for. Not for me, not for them, but for him. His future, his stability. We ended the call with a promise. Not to each other, but to ourselves. He was going to make it. A few days later, I saw him again. He was standing by his car in front of a small duplex. He looked different. Not just physically, though he had gained some weight back and had cleaned himself up a little. But something else had changed. There was a quiet strength about him. He had done what I had never thought he could. He didn't ask for help this time. Instead, he held out the keys to his new place. Not in a boastful way. Not like a man who had won a prize, but like a man who had earned it. "Mom," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I did it. I paid for this place with my own money, and I'll pay the bills. I'll be a father, a husband, and a son. I'll do it my way. No more excuses." I nodded. "I'm proud of you," I said, my voice breaking, though I wasn't entirely sure why. "I wouldn't have done it without you," he admitted, his voice thick with gratitude. "But you didn't just give me the money. You gave me the space to find myself again. And that was enough." I hugged him tightly. The warmth of it didn't come from pity or regret. It came from a place of deep understanding. We had both fought this battle for so long, side by side, but never truly together. Now we were both standing on our own 2 feet. And I realized in that moment that I didn't need to save him anymore. He had saved himself. I watched him drive away, his car disappearing down the street, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not just for me, but for him, for all of us. And for the first time in years, I felt truly and completely at peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.